This is a private conversation that I need private. I need it to stay private for now.
This didn't happen overnight. Christine Brown's goodbye started long before the cameras ever caught it. It started in the quiet moments, the long pauses in conversations, the forced smiles, the laughter that no longer reached her eyes. For years, Christine had believed in the dream, in a love that could multiply, a family that could last forever, a husband who could love 4 women with equal hearts. She believed in faith, loyalty, and the kind of unity that defied odds. But love without connection is just endurance, and endurance, after too long, becomes exhaustion. Christine's life with Kody wasn't always pain. In the beginning, there was hope. There was shared dreams of a family, growing children, prayers before dinner, moments that felt like heaven on earth. She truly believed that what they were building was divine, that God had chosen her for this, for him. But over time, something shifted. Kody grew more distant, more controlling, more fixated on rules than on love. The family that once laughed together lived in fragments now. Conversations became lectures, touch became rare. And the look in his eyes, the one that once held affection, now only reflected frustration. Christine noticed. She always did. But she had stayed for years. She stayed since she felt that leaving would be a failure. She stayed because her faith told her to endure. She stayed for the children, for the dream, and the promise she made to God. Until the day when staying became a lie. It wasn't some great big argument or even a screaming fight that broke her. It was something quieter, something nobody saw coming. They were finishing a small project together, a door for her home. And in that moment, Kody talked more about rules and control than about them. When she asked if their marriage still mattered, if they could ever be close again, he just looked at her and shrugged. That shrug broke something inside her, because love doesn't shrug. He told her he wasn't interested in an intimate marriage anymore. He said people live that way, that couples survive without affection, without closeness, as if she should learn to accept a marriage without warmth, a relationship without love. But Christine couldn't do that anymore. She'd already lived too many years assuming indifference was peace. So she went upstairs, sat in silence, and let the truth sink in. This was not the life she was meant to live. The house that night felt colder than it ever had. The walls seemed to echo with distance. She realized she had been alone for years. She had just refused to admit it. And in that stillness, something inside her shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't bitterness. It was resolve. She had given all she could. Her love, loyalty, and faith. Yet it was not enough to make him stay, make him care, make him choose her. And so she started doing something she hadn't done in decades. She started to think about herself. The following morning, while Kody did his daily chores, Christine silently started packing, one box after another, her clothes, her books, little pieces of her life that had belonged to her long before him. Every box was a goodbye. Goodbye to waiting. Adios to disappointment. Goodbye to a version of herself that had always come second. When Kody noticed, he didn't understand. He told her she was being impulsive, dramatic. He said she was throwing away something sacred. But Christine had already made peace with her decision. She told him calmly that she could not live a marriage without love, that she could not teach her daughters that this was what they should accept, that she couldn't keep pretending this was faith when it had become fear. He didn't argue. He didn't fight for her. He had just stood there, wordless, aloof, proud. And in that moment, she knew she'd made the right decision. Because the minute you realize someone isn't fighting for you anymore is the minute you stop fighting for them. Christine wasn't angry. She was free. Not yet in the world, but inside herself. When it finally came time to tell her children, there were tears, confusion, and relief all at once. They had seen their mother's sadness. They had heard the tension in her voice. They had watched her pretend to be fine for too long. Now, for the first time, she didn't have to pretend. Janelle understood. She had been witness to Christine's struggle, had heard her pain in late-night talks and quiet sighs. Mary, while hurt, knew what such emptiness felt like. "And Robin," she cried. "She said she wishes it didn't have to be this way." But Christine had already accepted that endings aren't always failures. Sometimes they're beginnings in disguise. When the day finally came, she took one last walk through her home. The rooms were empty, but they didn't feel lonely. They felt lighter. She touched the walls, smiled through tears, and whispered a quiet prayer, not for what was lost, but for what was coming. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew why. She wasn't leaving for another man, another life, or another promise. She was leaving to remember who she was before faith became fear, before love became labor, and before she forgot her own worth. Christine walked out the door not as a wife, but reborn as a woman. And with the door shut behind her, she didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because she was finally ready to move on. Her story didn't end with heartbreak. It began with it. Because sometimes, freedom doesn't come with fanfare. It comes quietly, in the courage to say, "I deserve more." That was the last goodbye. Not to Kody, but to that version of Christine who stayed too long waiting for love that never came. Freedom. It's a word that sounds beautiful, powerful even. But Christine's experience of that place when she first found it was not joy. It was emptiness. For nearly 3 decades, her world had revolved around one man, one faith, one family. Her identity was irrevocably woven into the fabric of being Kody's wife, the third sister wife, the peacemaker. And now, all of that was gone. The first morning she was gone, Christine awoke in silence. No footsteps down the hall, no voices, no family chaos. Just the sound of her own breath. It was peaceful, but also terrifying. For the first time, there was no script to follow. No one telling her what a good wife or a faithful woman should be. She didn't have to check whether or not her choices made someone else uncomfortable. She could do anything she wanted, but she had forgotten what that meant. Freedom has a strange kind of weight. It's not heavy because of what you carry, but because of what you've put down. Christine had released her marriage, her old beliefs, and the version of herself that lived for everyone else. But now she had to learn to live for herself, and that was harder than she'd ever imagined. At first, the days were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you listen to your own thoughts. She'd sit by the window with her coffee, staring out at the horizon, wondering if she'd made the right choice. Kody wasn't calling. He wasn't fighting for her. He wasn't even trying to understand. And that silence hurt more than the arguments ever did. Because when you leave someone, a part of you still wants them to ask you to stay even when you know you can't. Christine felt that, every day. She had walked away for peace, but peace can be lonely if you are used to chaos. There were moments she questioned herself, not because she missed Kody, but because she missed belonging. The family dinners, the laughter between the wives before it all turned sour, the kids all growing up under one roof. Even the noise of it all had been a comfort once. Now it was gone. But in that void, something else started to grow strength. She slowly started to take back her life, one small decision at a time. She started cooking meals that she enjoyed, decorating her home in colors she liked, and watching shows that made her laugh. Mundane details, routine things, yet for Christine, they were everything. She had spent years adapting her whole life to fit someone else's ideal of what her life should be. Now she didn't need permission to be herself. Yet even with this new freedom, the ghosts of her old life still lingered. Sometimes she'd catch herself wondering how Kody was doing, whether the other wives were okay, if her leaving had truly made things better or just broke what was left. There were nights she'd lie awake replaying conversations, the tone of his voice, the look in his eyes when he realized she was really gone, and then she would remind herself, he had years to change, years to care, years to show love, and he didn't. That reminder became her anchor. She learned that freedom isn't about running away from something painful. It's about walking toward something peaceful, even if that peace takes time to feel real. Christine began to spend more time with her children. She listened really to their thoughts, to their fears, to their relief. All this while they had watched her suffer in silence, trying to be strong for everybody else. Now they saw a new version of their mother, lighter, happier, and more alive. And while they missed parts of their old life, they understood why she had to go. Yet freedom doesn't wipe out sorrow. Christine grieved the family she once believed in. She grieved the version of KODY that she had fallen in love with. She grieved the dream, not because she wanted it back, but because it had meant so much once. In that grief, she began to heal. One evening, she wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. She wrote, "I spent so long being afraid of breaking the family that I forgot I was already broken inside it." That truth hit hard. She wasn't the villain for leaving. She was the survivor. And yet, there was another truth she began to see. You can leave a place long before you walk out the door. Emotionally, she had been gone for years, disconnected, unseen, and unheard. Leaving physically was just the last step. Freedom didn't erase the pain, but it gave it purpose. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have to pretend. She could cry without guilt, laugh without permission, and breathe without explaining herself. No person asked her to be smaller, quieter, and more obedient. No one asking her to earn love that should have been freely given. She was free, but she was still learning to wear that freedom. Because when you have been controlled for so long, even peace can feel unfamiliar. And when your whole identity had been formed around another person, finding out who you are may be like starting a life all over again. Christine didn't have all the answers. She didn't know where her journey would take her, only that it had finally started. The weight of freedom is heavy at first, but as you carry it, it becomes lighter. Because freedom, once it settles in your bones, becomes strength. And Christine was learning to be strong in a way she never had before. Not as a wife, not as a sister wife, not as a believer, but as herself. Rebuilding doesn't start with bricks or plans. It starts with belief. And for Christine Brown, belief was something she had to learn all over again. After decades of living in a world built by other people's rules, Christine found herself standing within the ruins of an old life. But for the very first time, these ruins were hers to rebuild. No more shared decisions. No more waiting for approval. No more pretending everything was fine. For the first time in years, Christine could breathe freely. Freedom alone, however, does not fill a life, and you have to build one. She started small. Morning walks, quiet prayers, journaling, learning to enjoy her own company, something she had never been allowed to value. She wrote one sentence in her notebook every day. "Today I choose peace." At first it felt strange, almost selfish, to think of herself before others. For years, she had been taught that selflessness was holiness, that obedience was love, and that questioning meant doubt. But now she understood that obedience without love was just submission, and submission without choice wasn't faith. Christine began to rediscover her relationship with God, not by sermons or doctrines or interpretations from someone else, but in her own voice. She would sit outside under the open sky and talk to God like an old friend. Not asking for answers, just gratitude for the courage to start again. That's when something shifted. She no longer felt like she was running from her old life. She was walking towards something new, and that new life began to take shape. She moved to Utah, a place which once symbolized for her fear and exile, but now a promise of home. A new beginning. A chance to raise her daughter, truly, in peace, far from the tension that had poisoned so much of their old life. Utah was quiet, peaceful, free from the constant camera lenses and the heavy expectations of polygamy. Christine filled her home with light. Soft colors, laughter, music, things that made her feel alive again. For the very first time in her life, she constructed a space wholly her own. No shared bedrooms. No shared husband. No shared pain. Just a woman and her child, learning what joy looked like again. But rebuilding also meant the healing of wounds that couldn't be seen. Because even when you leave a broken marriage, the echoes stay with you. Christine still had moments of doubt, not about her choice to leave, but whether she was strong enough to build something better. She had been so long led to believe that her worth derived from her position within the family, her service, her faith, and her patience. Now, she had to define her worth on her own. And that's where the real rebuilding began. She reconnected with her adult children, especially those who for years had watched her struggle in silence. They supported her, reminded her of the woman she used to be before she forgot her own joy. Aspen and Mykelti would say, "Mom, you're glowing now," and she was. Because Christine's light was never gone. It had just been dimmed by years of compromise. Now, every laugh, every smile, every moment of peace was a brick in the new foundation she was building. And part of that foundation was honesty. Years had passed, and Christine had lived in a family where appearances were held above truth, a framework in which pretending was survival. But she was done pretending now. She spoke openly about her experiences, not out of anger, but out of release. She spoke her truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it countered the narrative others wanted to believe. In that, she found something she hadn't felt in years: connection. Thousands of women recognized themselves in Christine, those who had stayed too long in relationships that made them small, who had equated endurance with strength, loyalty with love. Hers was a story much larger than the sister wives themselves. It became a mirror for anyone who had ever chosen themselves after years of being told they couldn't. Christine didn't just rebuild her life. She rebuilt her voice. She smiled more during interviews, laughed more freely, and spoke about happiness like a new language she was just now proficient in. Because in many ways her world was no longer defined by who she was to someone else. It was defined by who she was to herself. She cooked her favorite meals. She traveled. She learned to enjoy silence, not as loneliness, but as peace. Christine learned that it is not about forgetting the past when one starts over, but about learning from it. Every wound, every disappointment, every unspoken word had taught her something. She learned that love is not proven through suffering, that marriage is not sacred if it silences you, and that faith means nothing if it costs your happiness. Slowly, her heart began to heal. And as it did, something unexpected happened. She began to open it again. Not because she needed someone to complete her, but because she was finally complete enough to love again without fear. She didn't rush it. She didn't plan it. She just let it happen, naturally, quietly, beautifully. Because rebuilding doesn't mean recreating the old. It means becoming someone new. Christine wasn't the same woman who once cried behind closed doors. She wasn't the woman who asked for permission to be happy. She wasn't the woman who lived in Kody's shadow. She was Christine Brown, independent, joyful, and strong. She had rebuilt her home, her faith, her voice, and her identity. And with every sunrise over her new life in Utah, she realized, freedom isn't about leaving someone else. It's about coming home to yourself. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, quiet, and profoundly personal. To Christine Brown, healing wasn't about forgetting her past. It was about learning to live again after years of merely surviving. When she initially left Kody, Christine told herself she didn't need love. She needed peace. She needed to learn who she was when she wasn't a wife, when she wasn't a peacemaker, when she wasn't defined by someone else's expectations. And for a while, that was enough. She found joy in small things, in her children's laughter, in cooking her favorite meals, in walks through her quiet Utah neighborhood. Each simple moment had become sacred because it was hers alone. But healing has a way of surprising you. When you stop chasing love, sometimes love finds you in a gentler, truer form. Christine wasn't looking for a new relationship. She had come to accept that her story might just be about independence. But deep down, she also knew she still had love to give. She had just been giving it to the wrong person for far too long. It didn't happen with fireworks or big gestures when she met someone new. It was slow, natural, deeply kind. He listened. He laughed with her. He saw her, not as part of a plural marriage, not as a character from a TV show, but as a woman who'd survived heartbreak and found her strength again. Christine didn't fall in love out of loneliness. She fell in love out of wholeness. For the first time, love didn't feel like walking on eggshells. It didn't come with rules or conditions. It didn't ask her to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. It allowed her to be loud, to laugh freely, to take up space. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of healing. To realize love is not meant to hurt or demand or control. It's meant to build. Still, Christine didn't rush into her new chapter blindly. She carried her lessons with her, every scar, every tear, every truth earned through pain. She knew what she wanted, but most importantly, she knew what she was no longer going to accept. Her children noticed the change almost immediately. They saw the sparkle in her eyes, the lightness in her laughter. They said that she seemed younger, freer, as if finally she had come back to life. And maybe she had. Because love, when it's right, doesn't drain you. It revives you. Christine began to dream again. Not about big houses or perfect families, but about simple happiness, real connection, shared laughter, and honest affection. Perfection wasn't what she wanted anymore. She wanted peace. Her new love supported her independence. He admired her strength, celebrated her choices, and didn't compete with her past. Instead, he helped her create a new story, one built on respect, not hierarchy, trust, not fear. For the first time in her adult life, Christine felt safe in love. And as she healed, she also started to forgive not because Kody deserved it, but because she deserved to be free of the weight he left behind. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about releasing what no longer served her. She ceased replaying arguments in her mind. She ceased wondering what could have been. Because finally, she got it. Sometimes, you can't save a relationship, and that's okay. Christine's story transformed from one of pain to one of peace, less about endings and more about beginnings. In interviews, she spoke about her journey with grace, not bitterness. She said she didn't hate Kody. She just couldn't live in his world anymore. She said leaving wasn't about breaking faith. It was about finding it again, within herself. And maybe that's what healing really is. Remember, it's your heart and yours alone to protect. With time, Christine's joy was contagious. Fans who had watched her pain for years now watched her bloom. She wasn't the woman who cried behind closed doors anymore. She was the woman who danced in her kitchen, who laughed with her daughters, and who spoke her truth without shame. She did not claim to have all the answers, nor was she living an idyllic life. But for the first time, she didn't have to pretend at all. And as she walked down the aisle this time, for herself, it wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of survival. Because Christine Brown didn't just find new love. She came alive again. A life where love wasn't earned, it was shared. Where faith wasn't control, it was freedom. And where happiness wasn't forbidden, it was her birthright. Her healing became her victory, and her victory became her message, that it's never too late to start over. That one can lose everything, and yet find himself. That freedom isn't lonely, it's sacred. Christine's laughter, rare and cautious in the past, filled every nook and corner of her new home. Her eyes, once tired and guarded, now shone bright with the light of a survivor who had lived and thrived. Because sometimes healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you were meant to be all along. Christine rebuilt her life, not to prove anything to anyone, but because she finally believed she was worth rebuilding for. And that, more than anything else, was her greatest act of love. It's seldom that redemption comes the way we imagine it. It doesn't arrive wrapped in applause or validation. It comes quietly, in the peace which follows pain, in the strength which grows where sorrow once lived. Christine Brown's redemption wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about finally living the life she was always meant to live, a life built on authenticity, love, and self-respect. Years after having left, KODY, Christine stands taller, smiles brighter, and talks with the confidence of a woman who has faced her storm and walked out the other side. From soft and uncertain, her voice now carries conviction. Her laughter, once rare, has come to be her signature. When people ask her what changed, she doesn't discuss KODY. She talks about herself, about rediscovering her value, about raising her daughters to know that love should never require them to disappear, about choosing happiness, even when that means breaking away from what others call sacred. Christine's redemption began not when she left her marriage, but when she stopped apologizing for leaving. She had carried guilt for years. Guilt for breaking. The family for others' disappointment in her, for choosing herself. But over time, she had learned that guilt and growth couldn't coexist. You can't heal if you stay punishing yourself for having survived. Now, Christine doesn't define herself as KODY's former wife. She is Christine Brown, mother, friend, partner, and woman of faith. But her faith looks different now. It's quieter, more personal, more real. She no longer measures holiness by how much she sacrifices, but by how much peace she carries. That's the thing about redemption. It's not about being perfect, it's about being honest. Christine's honesty has inspired thousands of women. She's shown that leaving doesn't make you a failure. It makes you brave. She's shown that faith isn't about staying in the pain, but about trusting God enough to walk toward joy. When Christine looks back now, she doesn't see wasted years. She sees lessons. She sees growth. She sees both the version of herself who gave all for love and the one who finally realized she was worth returning the same. The Christine of today carries with her the wisdom born of heartbreak. She knows what it's like to not be seen. She knows what it feels like to beg for affection that never comes. She knows the loneliness of waiting for someone to care, and the power of realizing you don't have to wait anymore. Her redemption isn't loud. It's gentle. It lives in her daily life, in the way she speaks, in the way she parents, in the way she loves. She's no longer driven by duty, but by choice. No longer bound by fear, but guided by freedom. No longer performing for approval, but living for joy. And that's something KODY can't take away. When she talks about her past today, there's no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. She acknowledges the pain, yet she refuses to live there, because redemption is not about pretending it didn't happen. It's proving that it no longer controls you. Christine often says she didn't leave to destroy the family. She left to save herself. And in saving herself, she may have saved others too, her daughters, her fans, anyone who needed permission to choose peace over suffering. It has turned into a movement of strength not based on scandal. A reminder that walking away from something broken isn't giving up. It's growing up. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about Christine's redemption. She never asked for anyone to see her as a hero. She had simply opted for being human. When she laughs now, it's not the nervous laughter of a woman trying to hide her pain. It's the laughter of a person who's found joy, deep, unshakable, unapologetic joy. In the mirror, she doesn't see that tired, quiet wife who stayed too long. She sees a survivor, a mother, a woman who found herself in the wreckage. She's no longer living in the shadow of what could have been. She stands in the light of what is. Christine's redemption is not a fairy tale. It's real life, messy, hard, and beautiful. It's proof that you can lose everything you thought you wanted and still end up with everything you need. Her story concludes, Not with a period, but instead with an open door, a future wholly belonging to her. This time, Christine isn't on anyone else's path. She's making her own. And at sundown, over her new home, she doesn't look back with regret. She looks forward with hope. Because the woman she became wasn't born from perfection. She was forged from pain, strengthened by faith, and defined by freedom. Christine Brown found redemption not in being loved by others, but in finally loving herself. And more than anything, that is what makes her story timeless.